Me and Justice Harris, essentially.
So when you want me to stand to the side
Just
behind Justin?
Just right over here. I got to grab one more thing.
You make me look like a model. That's cold.
Joe, you got it tightened up here? Right on the dot. Okay. Is everybody good, camera-wise? Sound? Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started. I think everybody kind of knows who I am. My name is Ken Crane. I currently serve as the president of the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association. Been a cop for almost, well, going on 28 years now. I want to make some introductions. I got a lot of folks standing behind me. I got members of my executive board. Daryl Kriplin is our treasurer. Frank Marino is our secretary. Our VP is Britt London. I got other board members and reps here also. Mr. Joe Kluwer's here. He is a retired Phoenix cop, former PLEA president, now serves as the executive director of our state group, the Arizona Police Association. I've got Chad Drexler, the president of Peoria POA, Mike Fain, president of Northern Arizona Law Enforcement Association, Justin Harris, president of Glendale, and Justin also serves as president of the Arizona Police Association. We're here to address an issue of serious concern with regard to Phoenix Police Chief's decision on a police use of force matter. The event I'm going to speak about is profiled in detail in an article just posted yesterday on our website at azplea.com. The article is titled River Rock Dodgeball, New Expectations on Use of Force. I've included a copy of the article in the press packet. Would encourage all of you to read it to obtain a detailed perspective on the issues surrounding this incident. Rank and file police officers see a trend in the post-Ferguson era of police work nationwide where police managers will often take the politically safe route when it comes to police use of force matters. This means the men and women who daily man the front lines are sometimes sacrificed for the benefit of a politically correct decision. We are here to tell the public and the men and women of the Phoenix PD that Chief Williams apparently has a new expectation on use of force, that officers now play dodgeball with river rocks when confronted with rock-wielding assailants. An officer-involved shooting occurred December 26, 2015, out in front of Cactus Park Precinct at 39th Avenue and Cactus Road. An officer and a sergeant had to contend with an unstable, uncontained, violent subject that had ingested meth earlier that day and had a death wish. He started by throwing an object that struck a fully marked police vehicle occupied by a police supervisor. He then stripped block off the fence bordering a residential yard next to the precinct and proceeded to throw it at the front door of the precinct, shattering the glass. An officer then exited out the front of the precinct to provide backup for the supervisor. The subject then walked south toward Cactus Road, where there were 6 lanes of busy midday traffic and an ample supply of river rock near the roadway. The sergeant and officer trailed the subject on foot and called to him, fearing he would go into the roadway or possibly throw rocks at passing cars. They began yelling commands at the suspect, telling him to drop the rock and that they didn't want to hurt him. As he walked back toward them, he had a river rock in his hand. Several commands were given to drop the rock. He refused and threw it like a baseball, endangering the lives of both the officer and the sergeant, who was a few feet to the officer's left. The distance from officer to suspect was later determined to be approximately 38.5 feet, just over 12 yards. Just prior to the shooting, the officer had taken a kneeling position and, perceiving a serious threat that could cause serious physical injury or death, fired one shot, hitting the suspect. The rock thrown by the suspect also struck the officer on the front knuckles of his left hand, causing severe lacerations to 2 fingers. The suspect succumbed to his injury at the hospital later, and then a concurrent criminal and internal investigation was done. I want to demonstrate something real quick. I'm going to ask Sgt Smith here to just take a two-handed firing grip with this red gun. He's going to put it straight out. If a rock is coming in, directly in, and it hits right here on the knuckles, and the report describes severe lacerations to 2 knuckles. If this comes in a couple of inches higher, here's the trajectory, right here. Bridge of nose, forehead, eye socket. Okay, thanks. A police department PIO at the scene that day stated, quote, "The officer returned fire by shooting 1 time with his gun, striking that suspect and ending this violent encounter," end quote. He then went on to state, quote, "We believe the neighborhood is now secure," end quote. The officer was cleared by the Maricopa County Attorney's Office of Criminal Wrongdoing. 15 months later, a police department use of force board was convened and forwarded a recommendation of, quote, "out of policy" to the chief. The chief rubber stamped that recommendation the same day it was authored. This raises a question. How did the involved officer go from hero to zero in 15 months? For the last 10 months, PLEA has appealed to the chief and the city manager, Ed Zucker, as recently as about 2 weeks ago, to reverse what we know to be a very flawed decision. We worked hard behind the scenes, having meetings, going over the shooting details. So during the same time period, the chief sent PLEA an email on July 28th and stated, quote, "While your discussion was compelling, I do believe the officer could have chosen to move out of the path of the river rocks and cinder blocks thrown by the suspect. The chief has held firm, and the city manager made it clear he will back the chief. That's certainly his prerogative. The chief, in turn, recently informed us she's now planning on having an outside agency do an independent review. Let me tell you something. This is nothing more than a smoke and mirrors ploy in an effort to have another agency head backstop her decision. All of our attempts at informal resolution have fallen on deaf ears, which is why we are now taking the issue public. Let me speak to some of the elements of this shooting. First, the involved officers. Both were veteran street officers with a combined level of law enforcement experience of almost 30 years between them at the time of the shooting. Both were seasoned cops who have seen and experienced a lot prior to this incident. In other words, not prone to overreaction. The suspect, what was known at the time, we had a male subject, 6 foot, 190 pounds, armed with a large river rock, described as measuring 3.5 inches by 5 inches by 1.5 inches, weighing 1.4 pounds. He was angry, aggressive, verbally abusive, non-compliant, and had already displayed a violent disposition prior to the final confrontation leading to the shooting. What became known after the fact about this person? He was 41 years of age, had a prior arrest record, was on supervised probation, and had ingested methamphetamine earlier. He had previous struggles with depression and had told a relative earlier that day he, quote, wanted to die and, quote, was going to try to get killed. Of course, our guys didn't know that. But in other words, a person with a death wish. Let me talk about de-escalation real quick. De-escalation is a new buzzword in training trend, in law enforcement nationwide. The Phoenix PD and many other agencies have embraced and currently teach this philosophy. De-escalation tactics were utilized in this situation. For example, when the supervisor's vehicle was struck, he didn't immediately get out and confront the suspect. He kept the suspect under observation and called for backup. That's a smart move. You're not rushing in. When the suspect ripped block off the wall of a nearby residence, the sergeant continued to observe and wait for backup, as no one was being directly threatened at this point. At the point the suspect began using cinder block to break out the front door of the precinct, the backup officer was preparing to come out. The officer waited till the suspect moved on rather than charge blindly out the door. Once the officer did come outside, both he and the sergeant worked as a team to approach and attempt to communicate with the suspect who was walking towards a busy roadway. They did not attempt to chase him down, which could have driven him out into a very active 6-lane thoroughfare. The officers tried to calm the suspect. Drop the rock, we don't want to hurt you. It was only when the suspect aggressively approached the officers, refused numerous commands to drop the rock, and then used the rock to launch an aggressive assault on them that lethal force was used for their protection. I'm going to talk real quick about what's called a reasonable officer standard in our line of work. Although the sergeant did not fire his weapon, he reported in post-shooting interviews he was preparing to fire. This speaks to what's known as a reasonable officer standard. In other words, would other officers presented with the same set of circumstances perceive the same level of threat and react in a similar fashion? In this case, the answer is a clear yes. Let me talk real quick about the science involved. Lag time, velocity, reaction time, and perceptual distortion. There's actual scientific research behind the human factors related to use of force. This research tells us that brain and body typically react in quarter-second increments to stimuli. In other words, it can take a quarter of a second for the officer to perceive the threat posed by a suspect. Another quarter second for the brain to send the neural impulse to the hand, telling it to begin the draw stroke. Another quarter second for the officer to draw the gun. Another quarter second to align the sights, and another quarter second to depress the trigger. If you're doing the math, it's 1.25 seconds. And it's really fast. All right? In this particular case, the officer was able to react quicker, maybe about a half second or so, since he was already dialed into the threat and his gun was out and generally aligned in the suspect's direction. Once he perceived the guy was getting ready to throw, the officer merely had to align and stroke the trigger, so he could have, it wouldn't have taken 1.25 seconds. This brings us to the next point. Does a distance of 38.5 feet give ample reaction to dodge a rock? Well, rather than guess, we got to do a little bit of math. What's on this poster board here is included in your handout packet. You have the same graphic and visual. And what this does is it gives us speed. Velocity's on the left, and over 38.5 feet, also 12, which is 12.8 yards, a little more than a first down, okay? At a slow throwing speed of 30 miles an hour, my guy had 0.87 seconds to react. Less than a second. All right? Most of us in this room could probably throw a rock like this. I could take you out in the back parking lot. Most of you could probably throw this at 30 miles an hour right now. Okay? This is not the exact rock. It's the same weight. This is a 1.5 pound river rock. Okay? I mean, that just sounds painful, doesn't it? Think of your head sitting there. Now consider a 41-year-old male, 6 feet, 190 pounds, in reasonably good health, not only angry and agitated, but also high on meth with a death wish. Do any of us really believe he couldn't throw a 1.5 pound rock more than 30 miles an hour? Knowing this, the chief believes that an officer in a kneeling position with less than 1 second to react should simply, quote, just move out of the way. This is an unreasonable expectation. It's called expecting a police officer to exceed the limits of human performance. I'm going to illustrate to you right now how short this reaction time truly is. We're going to do a little demonstration here. You got it? Jim's going to use a device we call a shot timer. We use this in police firearms training. It's used by competitive shooters for shooting drills. How fast did you get your shots off? Things like that. You can set up all kinds of stuff. I've dialed into this timer a 9/10 of a second time window. Now remember, 30 miles an hour, 0.87 seconds. I'm going to be generous. I'll make it 0.9. I'll give you 9/10 of a second. When he presses the button, two things are going to happen. You're going to hear a beep. That's when the rock's thrown. You hear a second beep. That's when my guy's getting impacted. Go ahead. Oh, yeah, just move out of the way. Anybody need to hear that again? Okay. Thanks. All right. You got yours? You're going to have to hold it where I can knock on it. Okay, we're going to do another little drill here. He's going to do another shot timer with just a start time. Whenever you're ready. Oh, he's throwing. Should I shoot? What, should I not shoot? Should I move left, right? Okay, let's try it again. Okay, he's going to throw. Should I dodge? Should I move? Should I go left or right? Should I shoot? Oh, 4.01 seconds. In our world that we live in on the street of split-second reality, that is called an eternity. 4 seconds. Okay, if it makes a point. Citizens and police officers alike involved in deadly force encounters can often experience what's known as perceptual distortion, meaning a person under stress can perceive things to be closer than they really are or can perceive them to be further away. And what's important about this point is police officers are not equipped with calibrated laser rangefinders in their eyes where we can go, oh, you know, he's this far, he's that far, he's close, he's far. Under stress, your body does weird things, and perceptual distortion is one of them. If the chief truly believes officers should just move out of the way, several questions are raised. Why hasn't the department been formally notified of these new expectations via the employee notification system? Why haven't new training scenarios on how to play dodgeball with bricks and rocks been implemented at the academy? And where are the AZ Post lesson plans that cover training on how to dodge bricks and rocks? Well, let me just tell you right now, clear it up, they don't exist. Most importantly, why does all our existing training to include current training scenarios at the academy now in today's era speak to the exact opposite of what the chief is advocating? Over the years, Phoenix officers and officers around the nation have had to use lethal force against suspects who have attacked with rocks, against suspects who have made furtive movements, and against suspects who brandish objects thought to be firearms. And with rare exception, most officers are found in policy on these types of shootings. Now we have a shooting where an officer doesn't shoot someone over a furtive move or because he thought a cell phone was a gun. He shot because a life-threatening pound-and-a-half river rock was hurtling toward his head, yet he's out of policy. Placing unreasonable expectations and unnecessary risks on officers by asking them to play river rock dodgeball is like throwing the white marble on the roulette wheel at a Vegas casino and betting everything on red. It might be okay to gamble in Vegas. It's not okay to gamble with your life or the lives of others. Now, the irony of this whole farce is that a use of force board recommended this shooting be found out of policy by attempting to cite policy violations that absolutely didn't apply. Then, when asked to reverse the decision, the chief came up with a completely different rationale, not even touched upon by the use of force board, nor covered in department policy, that of just moving out of the way. It goes without saying that police work can be extremely difficult. Using lethal force is the last thing any of our officers want to have to do. Yet every day they roll out of the station, they all know this could be the day they're thrust into a situation not of their own choosing, requiring them to use lethal force to protect their life or the life of another. Is it too much to ask for a chief that'll have our backs? A police chief who sets arbitrary and unrealistic expectations for those who daily work the streets by keeping a secret rule book no one else has access to is called setting your troops up for failure, not to mention negative impact decisions, the negative impact that decisions such as this have on morale. Officers begin to wonder, will I be next? How are officers expected to succeed when new rules are implemented on the fly? Ill-conceived policies and expectations such as these are dangerous and can cause officers to unnecessarily hesitate, resulting in death or injury. If the chief finds it problematic to back the rank and file troops who daily put their lives on the line, We certainly do not find it problematic, and we will be there to back them. Our message to our officers and detectives is this: do your job the way you've been trained, follow your department policy, follow the state law, and don't worry about police administrators out of touch with the realities of the street who expect you to follow made-up rules that are unreasonable, nonsensical, and dangerous. This concludes my remarks. I'm going to let Officer Justin Harris, who's the president of our state group, say a few brief words, and then we'll stand for any questions you have. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Justin Harris. I'm president of the Arizona Police Association. We represent over 12,000 active police officers across the state. I just wanted to make a couple comments here today about, unfortunately, today in the world in which we live in with social media, things happen fast, very quickly. And we're used to members of the public, even the media, questioning what and why did a police officer do what they did. Well, I can tell you right now that there's not a single police officer that I've ever worked with or that I even heard of that wants to come to work with the intent of wanting to shoot somebody else, another human being. We want to come to work, we want to do our job, we want to make the community safe, and we want to know that the administration has a set of policies in place that will allow us to do our job, and they will protect us and back us when we do our job correctly. Unfortunately, many chiefs, and we're starting to see this trend nationally, the police chiefs themselves are nothing more than a political entity. When they're making decisions not based on policy, and especially when they're not making decisions based on training, but they're doing it based on, does it pass the headline test? That's what they're looking at. How is the media going to report this, and how is this going to reflect on me, a representative of this department? Rather than Police Chief Jerry Williams stepping forward and making a decision that was within policy and reviewing their policy based on this use of force board's recommendation, if it's a bad policy, change the policy. But don't hang a police officer out to dry, because let me tell you something you don't hear of too often: victim and victimization. That police officer that day was put in a position to where he had to fire his weapon at another human being taking their life. He was a victim for having to do that to do his job, but now he's been re-victimized by a police chief in a shooting that occurred nearly 2 years ago, not being able to take care of himself or his family, and just this lingering stress of why didn't the department back me on this? Well, it's simple. Jerry Williams is more worried about her own career, her own perception from the media and the public, than standing up and saying my officer did what was expected of them. It's horrible that this individual's life was taken, but our officers were put in a position where if they didn't act, then they're going to be judged by the media, because what if this guy did decide to run out in the street, a car hits that individual, we're going to be judged because we didn't act. So, you know, you often heard that expression, a rock in a hard place. Well, there's technically a rock here, and the hard place is your administration. When they're coming after you for a political statement as opposed to doing the right thing, then maybe that person should consider their position of being a police chief if they can't handle the heat. And that's all I have.
Thanks. Okay, our remarks are concluded. We'll try to take any questions you might have and answer them the best we can, so we'll go ahead and open it up.
So county attorney ruled that the shooting was justified.
Yes.
And then it went to the use of force board, if that's correct name. Why was it sent there? Was there pressure from the victim's family?
No, good question. So standard procedure in most police departments, I can speak to Phoenix, the county attorney looks at it from a criminal perspective. In other words, did an officer violate state law? If they roll out to every shooting scene, and their one concern that they are going to deal with is, are we going to indict a cop tonight for murder? That's all they show up for. And fortunately, 99+% of the time, it's like, hey, we're cool with it. They do the walkthrough, get briefed by homicide, they'll look at the scene, walk through, and they pretty much know the day they leave that this is okay, it's good. But the final report does get actually shipped over to them for review, and it can take 6, 7, 8 months for the county attorney to issue what we call a clearance, a shooting clearance letter, okay? But we kind of know ahead of time what the outcome's going to be. So then, once that clearance letter comes, the police department, at least in Phoenix, convenes a use of force review board. And what they are looking at is did you violate some administrative policy or procedure? Okay? So you have criminal bounced by administrative. That's what we're looking at. So it wasn't, I don't mean to give a false perspective. It's not that they were gunning for this officer, no pun intended, okay? But it's standard procedure. We do it on all use of forces where firearms, deadly force is used, all right? That board, at least the one that our officer faced, was comprised of a peer officer, 3 citizens, a police commander, and chaired by an assistant chief, all right? So that day on that board, there were 6 people sitting there. They do bring in department subject matter experts, but the part of the problem that we see in the use of force board is the subject matter experts sit there mute unless a question is asked of them. They don't just get to weigh in freely on the discussion or go, hey, you guys got it wrong. Here's the other problem. We need citizen input on these panels. It's good that we have them. But what we see is oftentimes, as the association reps going into these use of force boards to represent a member, oftentimes we are the most highly trained person in the room on use of force. Why? We are actively seeking training. We're going to the use of force seminars. We're staying up on the most cutting edge science and technology involving police use of force. Citizens haven't gone to any of that. Not trying to bag on the assistant chief that chairs the board or the commanders that sit on it. Most of these folks have been on street work for 10 to 15 years. That's called being out of touch with reality, okay? It's like any other skill. You get out of the street, you lose your edge. And you kind of forget how it was. You forget where you came from a little bit, okay? And so what we see in use of force boards is decisions, personal bias creeps into decision making along with emotion. They don't stick to black and white facts and standards. I guarantee you, bet you my next paycheck, nobody did those calculations. We did. How hard was that? Took me 5 minutes and a laptop with an internet connection, and I figured that out. You think they do it? No. Why do we need that for? No. Well, I'd have been comfortable if you just waited another second. Well, really. Took the rock less than a second, you know. That's some of the stuff we hear. I'm not saying that's what they said in this one, but that's stuff we've heard before. Well, if you had to do, officer, if you had to do all over again, would you do anything different? That is a horrible question to ask. Yes, I would have filled out a leave slip and stayed home that day. That's what I would have done. Okay? The Supreme Court litmus test, Graham v. Connor, 1989, it's in your packet. That's a bright line policy on how to evaluate police use of force. And one of the justices in that case said, we cannot judge based on 20/20 vision of hindsight. In other words, we have to look, here's what's happening, what did the officer know in the moment, he's up, bang, freeze frame, right there, freeze it. What did he know? What was known to him? What was the threat coming at him? Was it an articulable and reasonable threat that warranted that level of force? If the answer is yes, it should be in policy. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. And reasons get made out of emotional bias and politics creep in. What's the community going to think? I don't want a bunch of angry citizens. Who cares? You got to explain why we did what we did. And be willing to stand up for your men and women that are doing the heavy lifting out there every day. So I kind of went off there, but.
Do you know how, you said there are 6 people on that board, do you know how those 6 voted?
No, and to that point, the way it's run is you go sit in the room, Internal Affairs comes in, does a very, very basic vanilla presentation. They put scene diagrams and photos. And it's kind of like, yeah, it was hot, it was sunny, it was 11:43, the officer came here, blah, 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 you know, this happened through the rock, pulled the trigger, any questions? You know, it's very, very, they do a good job. They keep personal bias out of it, it's just the facts. The officer is given a chance to tell his story. The board is allowed to ask questions. Then they clear the room and they deliberate. And we don't know what goes on and what's said in there. And we don't know how the vote is, and it's not recorded. It's kind of like a secret tribunal of sorts. And so I'm sure people kind of come up sometimes with some wacky off-the-wall ideas. You could have a senior commander or chief, well, 20 years ago I wouldn't have done that. Sorry, that's not what you're here to judge, what you would have done 20 years ago. We're here to look at the policy and the rule book and go, did this guy comport or not? It's really easy, but they get it wrong sometimes, so.
So this case did not pass that, or it did pass that, the use of force?
No, they ruled them out of policy, and then, so a lot of people going, man, tail into 2015, why now, right? It probably took the county attorney 6 to 8 months to issue a clearance letter. They usually don't do a use of force board until they have that letter in hand. That's the ironclad cementing that, okay, they're not going to charge you criminally, all right? But then the department, well, they're a governmental entity and they move slow. So they took however many more months, it was 15 months after the shooting when the use of force was convened. Here's the other thing. At the time the shooting occurred, Joe Yonner was the police chief. Jerry Williams was still in Oxnard. But unfortunately, she gets here and due to the delay, it hits her desk. She signed off on it. They had scheduled, since they found him out of policy, they were going to schedule him to be disciplined. I got a hold of her and said, hey, let's time out, put the brakes on this. We need to talk. Okay. Brought her right down here to our office, had an extensive briefing, whiteboarded everything out, explained it, went through a lot of what we covered with you guys here. Okay, I'll relook it. Schedule's full, might take me a month to get back. I'm like, cool, as long as you're going to relook it. And then about a month later, I get the email. He should have dodged. So we went back and forth some more in the ensuing months after that, all right? And then it culminated about a week and a half or so ago where we had a meeting with Ed Zucker, city manager, and kind of laid it at Ed's feet, and he said he would get with her. He did. He is elected to back his chief. I really didn't expect anything different. So that's, and now we're here, okay? It's an unreasonable, it's a very unreasonable, dangerous standard and expectation to put on our officers out there. And unfortunately, once that Pandora's box is open and you made the decision once, it's easy to make it the next time, and it gets easier and easier, and all of a sudden it becomes a police department pattern in practice. So, yeah, that answers that.
So he was back on the job, and then now is he off the job?
No, well, he's been working solid for 2 years running.
And then what happens next for him?
Well, that's a good question. Typically, if you're found out of policy on the use of force, you get scheduled for a disciplinary review board. It's been over a year. So that has not occurred. And one of the concerns I raised with the chief, as I said, based on our discipline matrix, we shoot and kill a guy, you call it out of policy, that's up to a class 3 violation. We could terminate it. You going to fire this guy? I said, of course you're not. You can't. I said, he does not even deserve a supervisory counseling. He shot to defend himself and protect him and that sergeant against a very, very real, rapidly unfolding threat. He acted in the moment.
So as things stand now, he's working.
Absolutely.
This disciplinary event may happen at some time in the future.
May or may not.
And your point here today is just to pull a plug on this stuff and say, let this guy alone. Is that the message?
Well, the message is, I think what we're trying to do here is we are trying to get out to the community to say, here's what's happening on your police department. And we're getting the word out to our men and women on the street, most of them that don't know about this, are oblivious to this case and all the machinations going on behind the scenes, because we wanted to try to work behind the scenes to get this resolved. We trust me, we went the whole 9 yards. We went the extra mile on this. And when people don't want to see reason or look at the science or the facts, and they want to make feel-good emotional decisions, I mean, look, I could take any one of you guys out in the parking lot and put you in a kneeling shooting position and pace off about 38 feet, and I can get a bucket of these, and I got some guys here with good arms. You know, anybody want to play some River Rock dodgeball? I'll do you a solid. I'll call the fire department to get an ambulance on standby, because a couple of you are going to be going to the hospital. Okay? So you wouldn't expect to do that. Why should we expect our men and women out there to do that and be put under that unreasonable standard? So
you said she had that private firm, or she was mentioning having a private firm investigate this.
yeah, that private firm's called the Tucson PD. Okay, so let's talk about that. hey, Bob, I got the union crawling up my backside over here on this use of force decision. I'm going to ship this thing over. It happened 2 years ago, and have you give it a relook. And tell me what you think. How do you guys think that's going to turn out? And here's the deal. Let's say he does. What other police chief is going to tell the police chief of the largest agency in the state and come out and go, Jerry, you got it wrong. You got to reverse this. That is not going to happen. And even if it did, is she obligated to reverse it? Nope. That's just that's an opinion. That guy has no jurisdiction over our department, our policies, our internal procedures, or anything. That's called political eyewash, is what that's called. She's already told me 3 times, and the 3rd time I bring it up, she goes, nope, I'm done. My mind's made up. Oh, but now you're going to send it out. Okay. That's like Ed Zucker having a problem with a labor decision I made. And I go, Ed, don't worry. I'm going to ship this over to Justin, who's the president of Glendale Labor Group, and see what he thinks. I'll send a report to you. Is anybody going to have faith in that? Of course not. So.
Have you seen an increase in officers being found out of compliance when it goes to this board since the chief has taken over for Yonner?
It's a hard call, and typically, I would say not necessarily, and here's why. Most of our shootings, most of the time the shootings are black and white. You know, guy with a shotgun running toward a schoolyard. You put 10 holes in him, okay, good job, you know, right? So most of the shootings we have are pretty cut and dry, and it's easy for people to mentally digest. But the minute you throw them a curve, oh, it was a rock, or, oh, well, the distance. It's like, okay, there's distance there, but let's sit down and do the math, okay? Let's really find out how much reaction time the guy had. Oh, when you do that, it's like, yeah. Because I'm telling you, at the distance and the speed at which things happened, it was literally throw, bang, I'm hit. It was that quick and literally probably faster than that. I mean, it was split seconds, tenths and hundreds of seconds that this occurred in. It's almost faster than your brain can really process to even think about dodging. And I told the chief, I go, Chief, he was kneeling. He anchored himself. He knelt down to diminish his profile. Good tactics. He took a knee, what we call a kneeling supported, elbow on the knee, and he's tightening up. But what did he trade away? He traded mobility for stability, okay? And that's the way it works in the tactics world. There's a yin and a yang, a plus and a minus. Anything else?
So at the end of all this, he could potentially lose his job.
Per our policy, but is that realistically going to happen? No, no way. Yes?
Has Chief Williams explained in any detail why she's backing this decision?
Yes, she did. I got an email that said he should have moved.
But nothing else?
No, he should have moved. He should have got out of the way of that rock. So two other things. Let me just share this with you. And this is in our article on the website. But recent training scenarios at the academy, most of us go through these annual training scenarios. I just went through this a few months ago. We're all required to go, okay? Scenario, two-man teams of patrol officers. You got tasers and, you know, inert guns, blue or red guns, right, the plastic guns. And the scenario is you're going to go confront a guy throwing, you guessed it, river rocks over a freeway overpass. And we go out there and you divide into two-man teams. And guess what? On each team, one guy has a handgun drawn and the other's got a taser out. Well, if we're supposed to dodge rocks, why wouldn't those instructors go, whoa, time out. What are you guys overreacting? Put the holster of those guns up. This is a taser scenario. We're always trained to deploy with lethal, and part of the training point in that scenario is rocks can be lethal instruments. Take a look at all these articles when we're done. I put up on the table here from around the country. New York shopkeeper got his jaw broke by a guy that threw an avocado at him, for God's sake. And a river rock? pound and a half. So one more thing I'll share with you. Officers that graduate the academy come through and sit in this classroom. I teach a 2-hour career survival and then give them another hour instruction. Had a group come through a week ago. I go, hey, let me run something by you guys. These are all brand new cops, just put their badge on, right? And I come in and I go, here's the scenario, and I lay it out. I lay out this scenario. And I go, and after you said drop it, the guy does this. He winds up, and a couple of people in the class visibly flinch like this when I'm winding up. I go, what are you going to do? Shoot him. Now one person goes, how far is he? Good question. I go, 12 and a half yards. Her response, yeah, that's pretty close. These are the people coming out with the newest and most current training from our academy. All of them to a person said, concurred, lethal force is a viable option in this scenario here. Everybody gets it. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Is there a policy directive that actually addresses this type of thing? Because you're saying that they're saying he should have moved, but is that a policy?
No. And here's the deal. You really can't make a policy. You're just setting people up for failure. It's like saying you won't shoot if it's X distance. Because then you're sitting there going, oh, man, how far is it? How? Bam, and you're hit. Right? We live in a world of split seconds. And everybody in the world has months to dissect it, and Monday morning quarterback us. And here's the deal. Not complaining. It goes with the territory. You have to accept that as a cop. But you also have to make people understand a little bit about our world. Okay? So we don't have those unreasonable expectations. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Did the use of force board send out a statement about why they came to out of policy?
They did. They sent a 1.5-page memo. Said, these are the policies we think you violated. So when I met with Chief Williams, I had that, and I go, boss, let's go through this. And I went through each one. I go, he didn't violate that. And I go, this one, yeah, he did that. He's good on that. That's covered. I use it like a checklist. I go, this reads more like a blueprint of what he did right than what he did wrong. And so that did come out. Now, in the article, if you read that article, all those bullet points are included of what the use of force board said. They're bolded with our responses. So you'll see it. Anybody?
What
Yes.
would you like the chief to do? You want her to reverse her decision?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the easiest way. I just don't know after today if she'll see it that way. What do you think? No, that's the simplest way to do it, and that's why we worked hard behind the scenes, because this is a common sense no-brainer, okay? Let me just tell you this, too. We represent officers in shootings, discipline matters, and let me tell you, all those offices back there that we sit in, I can't tell you how many times we pull people in behind closed doors and we're like, listen, you're out of policy on this, so we're going to go in there and present your side of it, but just understand they're going to find you out of policy, okay? And you're going to have to take a licking on this one, all right? We have those conversations. Hey, they're going to give you 24 to 40 off. That's the going rate for what you did, so we'll try to mitigate it, but you're going to get discipline. You have to go accept it. You got to go to the principal's office, take your paddling, right? We have those conversations all the time with our guys. This is not about the union digging in for a fight just to dig in for a fight. It really isn't. Anything else?
What's the officer's name?
I'm leaving the names out of it for a reason. Now, obviously, if you guys want to really go dig, get public records, you can probably figure it out. And the reason is this. I personally don't think the officer would care if I told you his name, but I'm not going to with the sergeant and the officer, because what's more important than the name is the conduct and the way it was handled. This could be any one of us up here. This could be any officer out on the street today. Something similar could happen like this. So, Anything else? Okay, guys, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. Take a look at this. We've got a lot of police association leaders and a lot of knowledge, so if you want to do any one-off interviews on the side, feel free. Take advantage of this access, and we'll go ahead and call it. Thanks again.
I got a bug out.
Hey, thanks for coming, man. Thank you for coming.
Well, that's why I